Good evening and welcome to the syracuse.com debate in the Democratic primary for the 22nd Congressional District in Central New York. I'm Chris Baker, an editor with syracuse.com and the Post-Standard, and I'm here today with the two Democratic candidates seeking a chance to challenge Republican incumbent Brandon Williams in November. Those candidates are John Mannion, a New York State Senator, and Sarah Klee Hood, a DeWitt Town Board member. John, Sarah, welcome, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
This race promises to be one of the most watched in the nation. It's a district that both Republicans and Democrats have identified as critical to winning control of the House of Representatives. It will determine who represents all of Onondaga and Madison counties and parts of Cayuga, Cortland, and Oneida counties in the federal government for the next 2 years, during a time of critical growth and change in our community, as we embark on the arrival of Micron and continue work on the transformational I-81 project. We're broadcasting live tonight from the SI Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University, which has once again partnered with us and offered space and resources to host this exchange of ideas ahead of this month's election. Speaking of the election, early voting begins this Saturday, June 15th, and Election Day is Tuesday, June 25th. To learn more about where and how to vote, visit elections.ny.gov. We'll start the debate tonight with opening statements from each candidate, then move on to the question and answer portion. Each candidate will have 1 minute for responses in that time, and time for rebuttals at my discretion. We flipped a coin ahead of time to determine who begins. Sarah, you'll go first.
Great, thank you. Can I start?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks to syracuse.com, Newhouse, and Chris for hosting this event tonight. I'm Sarah Klee Hood, and I'm delighted to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to both introduce myself and share why I'm best positioned to beat Brandon Williams in November. I was born and raised here in Central New York. I graduated from Chenango. My dad's a retired IVW electrician, and my mom's a former SEIU nurse. I'm the first in my family to graduate from college, and yes, I have some student debt. After college, I commissioned into the U.S. Air Force, where I served for 6 years and was a captain. I led a team of 140, managed a budget of $25 million, in addition to developing and implementing federal and foreign policy. When it was time for my husband and I to hang up our boots, we knew that we'd move back to Central New York, where I'm a mom raising 2 daughters. I was fortunate to stay at home with them when they were young, and I recognize the challenges our young families are facing today. Most recently, I worked in environmental policy. I directed a federal grant program where I helped create hundreds of local jobs in the climate sector right here in NY22. And as a local elected, I'm charged with implementing federal policy with all of the baggage and none of the budget. I've got some areas for improvement. As a woman who had to seek abortion care while serving in the military, when my family received devastating news, you better believe that I am the champion we need for women's rights. My experience already speaks to federal legislation, budget management, foreign policy, environmental policy, but most importantly, how local lives are affected by our daily issues.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you. John, let's start with you.
Thank you, Chris, and it's great to be here at SU at the greatest communication school in the country. I'm Senator John Mannion. I'm a lifelong Central New Yorker, and I was a teacher for the majority of my adult life. I had the honor of teaching kids at 3 schools, Christian Brothers Academy, Nottingham High School, and West Genesee High School. My wife, Jennifer, also has been a teacher. Collectively, we've taught in schools for almost 60 years. I watched the 2016 election. At the same time, I was concerned about changes in public education, and that's what drew me to a different calling of public service. I watched those 16-year-old juniors watch a presidential election like they never should have seen, and here we are 8 years later, still facing greater challenges as it comes to our democracy. I ran for state senate and flipped a seat that was held by Republicans for 100 years. And in my time in the Senate, I have strengthened reproductive rights for women and their providers. I've also passed in my 2 legislative sessions the Equal Rights Amendment, which will be on the ballot in November. I've expanded universal pre-K to upstate New York and fully funded the foundation aid formula for our schools. And it was the green chips legislation that I'm the co-prime sponsor of that helped in a bipartisan way bring the largest private investment in the history of this country, as we are going to onshore semiconductor chip manufacturing, not just in this country or in this state, but in Klee, New York, which is in my state Senate district.
Thank you, John. We'll move on to the question and answer portion, and I will interrupt you if you run out of time. It is not to be rude, it is to keep us moving along on topic here. Our first topic, the question will go to you, Sarah. We're going to talk about abortion.
Sure.
Abortion has been a top issue in this race and will likely remain so in November. Both of you have staked out similar positions seeking to codify abortion rights into federal law after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Sarah, your campaign ads suggest that there's daylight between you and John. Where do you disagree?
Well, for starters, this is personal for me. I'm a woman whose rights were taken away. So yes, there is a lot of daylight between us. I'm a person who had to seek abortion care while serving in the military when my family received devastating news. And when we talk about abortion and we ask various questions, we are overlooking the important issues at hand. Yes, we must codify Roe to ensure that women have access to safe and legal abortions. But more importantly, we need to entrust women to have the ability to make their own decision about their medical health care as well as their futures. Anything less ensures that women are not treated as first-class citizens. We need somebody who will never waver on this important topic, regardless of the political tides.
John, where do you see disagreement on this issue?
So I'm proud to have been endorsed by Planned Parenthood in every one of my previous elections, and I have a 100% scorecard from that organization. So let's be clear that I am a champion for women's reproductive rights. As I stated, we will further embolden our laws in this state when voted on in November. We will enshrine into the Constitution the Equal Rights Amendment, which is long overdue. A woman's reproductive and other health care decisions should be between her and her medical provider. We continue in this state to be a leader, to make sure those protections are in place, and we will continue to do that as we have in the state legislature, making sure that we protect our providers if they send contraceptive or abortive medications out of state, and women who need to find care are in this state, and there are programs to assist them. So I'm proud of my record, stand by it, and will continue to fight against a national abortion ban.
Briefly, I'd like to ask you each about New York's policy that allows abortions up to 24 weeks. Sarah, do you support that law, and or do you think government should set any limits on how late in a pregnancy a woman can get an abortion?
I'd like to say when you ask that question, you're missing the point. The point isn't whether or not there should be access to safe and legal abortion care and timelines. The question should be, do we trust women to have the dignity and the authority to make the healthcare decisions that they need regarding their future and their medical decisions with doctors and without the opinions of politicians in the medical room with them?
But as far as the policy goes,
as far as the policy goes, there are a lot better options on the table. We could look to Virginia or the Women's Health Protection Act that prohibits government restrictions on the provision of and access to abortion services.
Okay. Thank you. John, same question on the 24-week issue.
So we must make sure that it is the decision between a woman and her healthcare provider. A national abortion ban is absolutely a possibility if we lose the House, the Senate, and the White House. That's why this race is so important, and we must make sure that we have a Democrat in the seat. What we saw with the changes to the Supreme Court was because we lost the 2016 presidential election.
But
So
are you in support of the 24-week policy?
I have previously supported the Reproductive Health Act, as had the Democratic majority that voted on that in 2019.
Okay. Thank you both. I'd like to move on to bipartisanship. One of you will face Brandon Williams in this November election. He's called bipartisanship politics as usual and suggested there's no reason to work across the aisle. Is he right? And if not, how would you work in a bipartisan fashion to benefit Central New York? John, we'll start with you.
So I already have a track record of doing so because I represent a community that has lots of Republicans, lots of Democrats, and lots of independents. In my current state Senate district, there are 33 municipalities. 29 of those municipalities are run by Republicans. So I've passed legislation by creating a new police force at the Syracuse Regional Airport that was needed because of safety concerns. I carried my own legislation for the Flood Mitigation Task Force that passed unanimously with bipartisan support. I am the Disabilities Chair, which means that when we work together to help some of our most vulnerable people, we must work in a bipartisan way. That green chips legislation passed with bipartisan support. I'm proud of that action, and I will continue to work to represent all people of Central New York.
Thank you. Sarah.
As a former officer in the military, I was raised professionally to work across differencing of opinions to understand and achieve the mission at hand. Unfortunately, our Congress is divided, and we need leaders that have experience navigating stressful situations, high-tension situations, understanding that differences of opinion do not mean that one is right and one is wrong. It simply means we can come to a better outcome when we work together. It is this experience that I plan to bring forward in Congress to ensure that we no longer have a sense of celebrity for an elected representative, but we truly are living the ethos of service before self, country before self.
I'd like to ask if you can each name one Republican in the House of Representatives who you could see yourself working with or would seek out to work with. John?
Mark Molinaro is a champion for people with disabilities, and we have conversed on that topic, and we will make sure that we protect our most vulnerable with bipartisan legislation in D.C.
Sarah?
You know, at this time, nobody comes to mind. Thank you.
All right, Sarah, we'll start this next question with you. Both of you have taken votes on issues that you later changed. Sarah, can you explain why, as a DeWitt Town Councilor, you initially voted to support the town's lawsuit aimed at stopping the I-81 community grid?
Sure, thank you for the question. From day one, I've always supported the community grid. When I took that vote for the I-81 lawsuit for DeWitt, I was voting to support social and economic and environmental services for DeWitt as a result of increased traffic on 481. When I learned that the lawsuit had a different intent, I immediately went into action and was able to ensure that the town of DeWitt no longer financially funded the lawsuit. Happy to report that we are no longer a party to the lawsuit. It's important that when we make legislation and that we take votes, we have a long view aspect of what the ultimate goals are for the project. For me, it was learning that the I-81 vote that I took disrupted the project and could potentially hold up the community grid. That's not satisfactory, and that wasn't the outcome that I had envisioned. And so I took action to rectify it.
John, can you explain why you initially voted against the New York Heat Act, which would speed the state's transition from natural gas to electric energy and cap utility bills at 6% of a person's income?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'm proud to say that I've been endorsed by the League of Conservation Voters in every one of my elections, including this election. And in all previous elections, I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club. I was a science teacher for almost 30 years. I taught AP biology and chemistry. I was an adjunct professor. I am 100% supportive of the energy transition that we were making. However, that piece of legislation would have disproportionately hurt upstate New York, a place where we make more green energy than almost anywhere else in the world. So I made sure that we changed that legislation, and I voted positively for that act when those changes were made so that we did not put additional unnecessary burden on the people that I represent. I will always stand up for the people that I represent and work in their best interests.
Thank you both. I'd like to move on to a question about poverty here in Syracuse and Central New York. Syracuse has one of the highest poverty rates in the nation for children and some of the highest concentrated poverty among Black and Hispanic residents. What's the single most important action you would take as a member of Congress to help address that problem? And John, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the question. You know, when I first was elected to the Senate, I had the honor of representing my hometown, the place where I was born and my wife was born, the city of Syracuse. My wife works in the city of Syracuse City of Syracuse School District, and part of my rationale for running for Congress was because I wanted to represent the area because of the disproportionate poverty that exists. We must invest. In my time in the Senate, even without representing the city, we have invested in universal pre-K, in childcare. I carry my own line item for the Manufacturers Association of Central New York, raising it from $750,000 to $1.75 million. It's an apprenticeship program that is changing people's lives. So we need to eliminate the poverty with good jobs, removing barriers to those jobs and opportunities, programs like we have at Mannion, our great Syracuse City schools, including the oncoming STEAM school that's supported by state funding.
Thank you, John. Sarah.
Sure, the number one thing that I would do would be to remove money from politics. Because when lobbyists, developers line the pockets of our politicians, the American people, to include the folks of the city of Syracuse, and we shouldn't forget the city of Utica as well in this discussion. But more importantly, when we remove politics, we start to prioritize people over politics. This will look like good paying jobs. It will look like affordable coverage health care. It looks like affordable child care. Metro transportation. It's imperative that we remove money from politics such that politicians will then be directly responsible to the folks that they are representing and no longer the special interests that are lining those pockets. I'm proud to be the only candidate in this election on either side of the aisle that has never accepted special interest or corporate PAC money. And that is because I am dedicated to representing the people of Central New York, Mohawk Valley, and NY22.
I think I'd like to return to the issue of special interest money, but a few other questions I'd like to get to first. If we can talk about inflation, and Sarah, we'll start with you on this question. Inflation continues to hold a grip on the American economy. If elected, what actions would you take specifically to lower costs for consumers and curb price gouging by corporations?
I get it. I'm a working mom with 2 young kids. The prices are going up at the gas pump. They're going up at the grocery store. And I'm not going to deny it. It's hard. I think there's a lot we can do. When you walk down the grocery food aisle, the cereal aisle, there are 3 manufacturers contributing to the majority of the products on the shelf. And why is that? Because we're not enforcing our antitrust laws. If we truly want to get back to a government that addresses the needs of the people, we must enforce the laws that are on the table, and that includes antitrust, not only in the cereal aisle, but across all corporate markets that we have.
Thank you. John.
Thank you for the question. You know, I was a teacher for a long time. My wife and I have a great relationship as far as it comes to grocery shopping, which is I do the shopping, she makes the lists and puts it away. So we have a working relationship where I see the real impact that's happening. So we have to take action. What I've done in the state Senate was we did multiple things. We accelerated the middle class tax cuts to keep dollars in people's pockets. We provided property tax relief and suspended the gas tax. So there's some things that government can do to make sure that people are keeping their dollars within their own family and not going out. Universal school meals have been expanded around this state so kids can go to school with a good breakfast and a good lunch, and that is not on the burden of the families. We have child care subsidies that we've increased in this state, acknowledging that we have to do better to make sure that there are opportunities for people, fewer barriers, and we fill those gaps.
Thank you. John, this next question will start with you. What do you view as the top threat facing the nation today, and how would you attempt to address that threat as a member of Congress?
Our top threat is a lack of truthfulness and holding our elected officials accountable for not telling the truth. What we have seen over the course of these 8 years since that 2016 election is a perpetuation of a lie. I've won tough elections. I'm battle tested. I have never won or lost an election on election night, and my volunteers have got to see hand recounts, absentee counts. They've seen how democracy works in the process. The elected officials out there that are questioning the integrity of the elections, they are elected. They know better. And to perpetuate that and it be perpetuated in the media is putting all of us at tremendous risk. So we have to refute that. We have to hold our elected officials accountable for not telling the truth.
Sarah, the top threat facing the nation.
Again, it goes back to money in politics. When special interests are able to buy congressional seats because they are able to give candidates money to either get in the mailbox, be on TV, or provide other support services that are outside of the traditional fundraising mechanisms, We are simply losing our voice as Americans in this political system. It is unfair and it's un-American. So when we have folks that are skirting rules from one elected position seeking another elected position, there's a significant threat to democracy there, and it all boils down to money in politics. I spoke recently, just a few questions ago. When money in politics is alive and well, such as it is today, we lose the sense of partnership across the aisle. The American people are no longer prioritized. Big corporations become the monopolies. It's time to refocus what our priorities are, and for me, that's the American people and the folks right here in NY 22.
I'd like to follow up with this question, just 30 seconds. What's an unimportant issue that you think Congress spends too much time talking about, worrying about, or legislating over? Sarah, I'll start with you.
I'm not sure that we're legislating on it, but maybe we are, but it's physical appearance. How one looks in the camera for their social media, or how one calls others out on the floor for not wearing a name brand outfit. These are superficial efforts to really cut down to the core of the business, the respect, and the honor of the federal level of government.
John?
Well, in this past legislative session, there was a tremendous amount of time spent trying to elect a speaker after a historic event occurred where the ousting of a speaker occurred midterm. And some dramatic things happened around the world, including the attacks of October 7th by Hamas on Israel. That happened at a time where we had no Speaker of the House. That should never have happened. It's why we need people who are willing to be courageous, willing to stand up, be pragmatic, work with everyone, and assure that the best interests of their constituents are what they're working on, not working on trying to hijack the legislative process or the leadership of the House of Representatives.
Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about money in politics. John, I'll start this question with you. You use state taxpayer money to send out at least 3 mailers from your Senate office in the month of May. While it's not illegal, how do you justify doing that so close to the primary election?
So every year, there is mail that is sent out to inform the public of sometimes events like we have. People in my district have received mailings about the Veterans Fair and the Senior Fair, which is very popular. And it's a way to update individuals on legislation that has passed and things that I have championed. This occurs with all Senate offices. It occurs in probably every state in the country, and it certainly occurs with frank mail in the House of Representatives. So we have a period of time where we are now contracted because we can't send the mail out at certain times. So it's a contracted time frame, and therefore the mail went out in that narrow time frame, being respectful of the election that's approaching.
Sarah, your campaign has raised more than $570,000 from donors in other states, about 60% of the money you've raised from individuals. Why have you relied so heavily on people who don't live in the district or live in New York?
I wouldn't call it a reliance. I would say that I have...
Sorry.
Okay. I wouldn't call it a reliance. I would say that I have a profile, a candidacy, and a story that speaks to national donors. We're at a time when our nation is divided. We are on fire globally. There are a lot of armed conflicts going on. And so the folks that live in this great nation are looking for leaders who have been proven already and have the experience and know-how to help legislate at the federal level. As a veteran, I absolutely have that experience. And more importantly, as a woman in a post-Roe era, I am bringing the experience and the qualifications to speak to this highly important issue here at the national level. And I'd like to talk for 1 minute. As a taxpayer, it should be known that I do not support using my elected senator using his state position and his state seat to send out campaign literature that looks very close to the mail I am paying a lot of money for to hit mailboxes. And additionally, when you signal on your website that you are looking for mail support outside of your SD 50 district, you are effectively telling special interests in other donors that you need mail support, not in your Senate district, because you've got that covered with my taxpayer dollars, with your taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
John, I'd like to give you a chance to respond to that, 30 seconds.
So we have a campaign that is supported locally. 90% of my donors come from the state of New York. I have used my position as an advocate for people with disabilities, public education, and otherwise, and I have informed the public when necessary. We have broad-based support in this campaign. 28 labor unions are behind me, the League of Conservation Voters. I have the support of multiple elected representatives of Congress, including Congressman Kennedy, Morelli, Arcuri. So I have the broad-based support. I have the support that is local, and I'm proud to have that support because the people here trust me, they understand me, and I understand them.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to a question about foreign aid and foreign wars, and John, we'll start this question with you. Should America continue to support Ukraine with military and economic aid? Same goes for Israel.
We must continue to support the Ukrainian people. I grew up on Tipperary Hill and went to school in kindergarten at St. John the Baptist Ukrainian School. We have very close relationships. The Ukrainian people are holding the line on democracy in Eastern Europe and therefore Western Europe, and we must continue our support for them. As far as the hostilities in the Middle East, the State of Israel is our ally. We have supported them for a long time. They are the only democracy in the region. As we move forward, we are all working towards, the world is working towards a peaceful solution, but the hostages must be released. On the Senate floor, I met with parents of hostages, of their child that is a hostage still held captive today. That has to happen as we move forward. Let's work towards a two-state solution, a peaceful and lasting solution moving forward.
Sarah?
Sure. Like many, after October 7th, I was horrified by the attacks. We must seek a bilateral ceasefire, allow all hostages to be returned, and most importantly, to end the civilian death toll as we work towards a peaceful solution and a two-state solution. In terms of Ukraine, they are an ally as well, and we have a right and we have a responsibility to continue to support them. As somebody who was a national security advisor for matters pertaining to Russia when I was an officer in the military, I know, you know, that Russia is a bad actor. They cannot be trusted with what they say in the Baltics. They said what they said, and they did what they did. They were in contrast of each other. So as we look forward and we look to our allies, we must understand that should Russia take Ukraine, the entire western region of Europe has the potential to fall like dominoes. So it is imperative that we maintain the allyship that we have there. And you know, as a former officer in the military, I've lost troops to war, both at home and on the battlefield when they returned home as well. And there are no winners in war. We have to recognize that our human resources are our greatest asset here in America.
Thank you. I'd like to now introduce Avery Gingrich, one of our student journalists here at the Newhouse School, who has a question for both of you. Avery?
Thanks, Chris. Thank you guys for your time. Representatives from upstate New York have been vocal in pressing college presidents to police speech on campus amid protests that have sometimes gotten out of hand on those campuses all across the nation. What role should Congress play in policing the policies and leadership of America's leading academic institutions? Sarah, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Avery, for the question. That's a good one. There is absolutely a role for Congress to help university presidents, deans, representatives, and that is to ensure that the First Amendment is upheld, that there is the right to peaceful demonstrations. Prior to October 7th, I'm not sure that we would have envisioned this type of activity that we're seeing on university campuses. But the role for Congress is really to be a provider of services and support. And what does that look like? It looks like education, understanding how to educate the folks in charge at the university campuses in terms of what does it look like to have a peaceful demonstration without affecting folks' First Amendment rights. It's ensuring that the students recognize where their rights are within the process as well. It's ensuring that the peacefulness remains peaceful and that when things start to turn, there is support measures to help de-escalate the situation, but always ensuring that the First Amendment right is upheld and that our young students and adults have the opportunity to express their will in a peaceful manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. John?
Thank you for the question, Avery. I grew up on Avery Ave on the west side of Syracuse, so it's good to have you here. I will always stand up for the First Amendment rights of students and others and the right to protest. But that protest must be peaceful, and it must be lawful, and it must not disrupt the workings of the day, the education of others. Those that are seeking education should be able to work in an environment that is free of hate, free of discrimination, and they should not be learning in fear. And that is where Congress can step in and embolden our laws. No student should face anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. We must protect those students, and we protect them with laws. I'm proud to say that my record in the state Senate, we have funded religious institutions, places of worship, and also educational places to embolden their security to make sure they can conduct their religious rights or their educational practices in a safe way.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Avery, for being here. Before we move on to the next question, I want to return to the Ukraine issue. Just a yes or no answer. Would either of you support putting American boots on the ground in Ukraine? John?
No.
Sarah?
No.
Okay. We'll move on to a question about climate change. And John, I believe we'll start with you on this question. Do you believe human-caused climate change is a problem? And if so, do you think the Inflation Reduction Act will go far enough in mitigating its worst impacts? If not, what policy or policies would you support to fully address the problem?
As an AP biology and chemistry teacher who taught combustion, who taught about the sequestering of carbon, who taught about the eutrophication of lakes and harmful algal blooms, what we're seeing is absolutely human impact causing increasing temperatures and therefore more violent storms in the area, or around the world. So we must take aggressive steps forward, and that's what we're doing in New York State. We're being a leader, and I have supported that leadership with multiple pieces of legislation to make sure that we make this energy transition in a rapid way, but also a pragmatic way that is funded, that supports the people who will be utilizing the energy. So the Inflation Reduction Act is a start, but we honestly should have started this transition a long time ago. So we're going to need support, we're going to need buy-in, and we're going to need incentives for individuals to make this energy transition and keep their rates low so that they can continue to live their lives if they must, and energy costs will not be too much of a burden on them.
Thank you. Sarah?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I moved into the environmental policy space because I know we are already at the environmental climate crisis. It is happening now. It is not in 5 years. It is not in 10 years. We're experiencing it right now, and I wanted to be a part of the solution. I directed 2 different grant programs, one for New York State and one for the Department of Energy within environmental policy. And the IRA is a great start, but let's be honest. The legislation that we have on the table from both the federal government and the state government, there are lines in the sand that are unrealistic and unattainable. I hate to be a Debbie Downer. I've seen the inner workings. We simply don't have the mechanics and the infrastructure in place to meet those goals. And so when elected to Congress, you better believe that I am going to be digging into the nuts and bolts of the legislation to make sure that moving forward, we have that bold legislation, but that it's realistic, that we have the technology in place to build out the infrastructure. We have farmers here that are experiencing firsthand the shifts in climate at the fields where they're growing their crops. We have folks here that aren't able to use public beaches during the summer because of the harmful algal blooms.
Thank you.
We are seeing the environmental crisis right here in NY22.
Thank you,
and we
Sarah.
need somebody with the experience and the know-how to change the legislation to ensure Central New York
If I can
thrives.
follow up, I would just like to ask 30 seconds. How would you address somebody who is concerned about the personal economic impact it has on them, some of these policies, things like electric vehicles, for example, mandates? How do you mitigate those concerns, or what do you say to a voter who is concerned about the economic impacts of some of the climate policies that are being enacted? John, we'll start with you.
Well, Simply what we have to do is make sure we support those individuals and with incentive programs so that they can make this transition. You know, some of the rhetoric that's out there can be very scary to people, but this is real. The costs are real, and that's why I voted accordingly the way that I did on the legislation as it related to utility costs. So when it comes to those costs and it comes to making this energy transition, it is going to take time and people are going to have to buy in. We want to make sure that there are not barriers to it. And the way there's not barriers is to make sure there's sound federal and state incentive programs to make this transition affordable for Central New Yorkers and people in the Mohawk Valley.
Thank you. Sarah.
The legislation on the table from both ends of the government does not support an everyday American's transition to a renewable energy space or the addressing the climate change crisis from their home. So let's talk about it. If you're on natural gas right now, it's probably going to cost $30,000 to $40,000 for you to transition your home from natural gas to electric. I don't have that laying around. I'm willing to guess many of you don't. But there aren't any support services in place to ensure that we have that mechanism to move forward. We can talk about EVs, but let's be honest. A lot of folks aren't in a position to purchase an EV, let alone meet a mandate that is requiring them to purchase an EV if, for a fact, they don't have the finances in place, nor do we have the infrastructure in place.
Thank you,
There are
Sarah.
a lot of
We're gonna
missed
move on.
targets here as we reach solutions towards the climate crisis.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about Social Security. Sarah, we'll start with you on this topic. You both oppose making any cuts to Social Security and to Medicare, but neither program will be sustainable without reforms to bring in more money or change eligibility rules. What's the single best thing that could be done to strengthen each program? Sarah, we'll start with you.
Sure, let's tax the ultra-rich. Thank you.
John?
Thank you. So I think the most pragmatic way is that we have to do is we have capped those top-end earners and what they support into Social Security. We have to move that cap much more significantly higher and make sure that as all of us age into our years into a program that we paid into, that we'll be able to live with dignity. It's simply that we want to make sure that individuals pay their fair share. Those that have profited from the systems that are in place in this country, their successes are ones we applaud, but we also want them to make sure that they support those systems. So I support raising that cap. It's the most obvious and pragmatic thing that we can do.
All right. Thank you both. We'll move on to a topic, the topic of immigration. John, we'll start with you on this question. What's your solution for immigration reform and border security? And would you support a path to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented immigrants already in the United States?
So we are a country of immigrants, and for those dreamers that are out there, I absolutely would support a pathway to citizenship. This issue has been politicized for way too long. We absolutely need comprehensive immigration reform, and that means we have to place logic into our immigration laws. We have to fund our courts. We have to fund our border systems. We have to fund the technology. We need the will, and it will be bipartisan will, to step forward together and truly solve this crisis of immigration to get it right. So we must fund it, and we can do all of those things in a humane way that is respectful of our history and respectful of those that are either fleeing oppression or coming here seeking opportunity.
Sarah?
So for my solution, I don't want to overlook the humanitarian aspect of this issue, but it fundamentally boils down to two aspects. The border crisis didn't happen at our border. It happened at the countries where many people were fleeing for safety of their own life or for an economic future. So in reality, this is a foreign policy issue. The U.S. has a responsibility to help stabilize those destabilized economies where folks are fleeing from. And once we start doing that, the border crisis won't have as much pressure right there at the U.S. border. And secondly, we have an immigration system. Have we ever seen it fully funded? This has been a multiple decades long situation. And if we want to be serious about finding a true solution, why don't we start looking at opportunities that are on the table? We must ensure that we fund the judges that are seeing the legal asylum seekers and their support staff so that we can move folks through the system the way it was designed. The Republican idea of a barbed wire fence is simply unserious. We need to come together, understand that understanding and funding the system as it was designed and allowing it to do its job. That is how we fulfill the American dream.
So I'd like to follow up just Joe Biden has recently put out an executive order limiting asylum and effectively closing the border, a very similar policy to what President Trump enacted in 2018. Do you support that executive order? Do you think it goes too far or not far enough? Sarah, we'll start with you.
As I spoke to, there is a crisis at the border. It is not because of a lack of policy. It is because of a lack of funding and destabilized regions that are south of us. So when we look to the executive actions of past presidents and presidents, I believe there's a path forward that doesn't involve them executing that level of assertiveness. I think that we need to come together as a Congress, recognize where our role is, and again, service before self, ensuring that this great country continues to speak to its roots of a melting pot, welcoming all, while also understanding that there is a vital role here to fulfill the system. Thank you.
John?
Thank you for the question. So, if you look historically at what the numbers are, right now we have a very high number of individuals crossing the border, and the president has acknowledged that and taken action. So, what I really believe we have to do beyond comprehensive immigration reform and making sure that the funding is there, is that there should be a division of our government that is continuously looking at what is happening at the border and how are we responding to it. And we have that at this time, but it really needs to be comprehensive. So, those numbers are in place, and I think it is a step in the right direction to make sure that we have, a reasonable immigration system that is working. We also have to look at our visa system that really has to be revamped. That is part of this comprehensive immigration reform.
So not to overgeneralize, but it sounds like you're saying that's a step in the right direction, and you're saying you don't fully support the policy.
I think there's an opportunity for improvement beyond executive order.
Okay. Thank you both. I'd like to move on to talking about the Supreme Court. John, we will start with you on this question. Some Democrats have suggested placing term limits on Supreme Court members or expanding the number of justices to deal with the imbalance in which conservatives have a 6-3 majority on the court currently. Do you support those ideas, and what role, if any, do you think Congress should play in being a check on the court's power?
So the first thing that we absolutely need is ethics reform. What we're seeing that is happening and has happened over time is really egregious, and there needs to be accountability. I do believe that we should have streamlined and really fortify the nomination process that has become something unlike what we saw before. We used to see Supreme Court justices who were truly qualified and applied the law and were not partisan, overwhelmingly approved. That is our history. So I do believe that there's a place for term limits. I do believe that there is a place for an increase on the court, but a gradual increase on the court, a logical increase on the court that would come under, the terms of presidents, and it would be reflective of the growth of this country as well. So ethics reform, term limits, and really a revamping of the nomination process that makes sense so we have highly qualified, nonpartisan judges on the bench.
Thank you. Sarah?
Absolutely. I said it last cycle and I'll say it again. I support expanding the bench. It is based off of historical precedents. But I think if we're looking for some low-hanging fruit, let's go for a code of ethics. Every other level of the judicial court system has a code of ethics in place. Let's hold our highest bench to that same standard. Let's look at term limits. And I think there's a real opportunity here to look at that nomination process. President George W. Bush nominated 2 justices who just voted to overturn Roe. This is what happens when we have partisan nominations that aren't for the will of the people, but for the betterment and improvement of their party. So yes, I support term limits, I support a code of ethics, and I support looking at our nomination reforms.
Thank you both. I want to talk a little bit about the job of being in Congress itself. We've talked a lot about policy and personality. Working in Congress is a thankless job, might be an understatement. You're traveling often, you're working away from family and friends. This Congress is historically unpopular, it's polarized, it's filled with personal infighting, hyper-partisan media. There have been record retirements in both parties, and this Congress has accomplished less than any Congress in history. So on its face, working in that environment seems like a job nobody would want. So outside of influencing the policies we've discussed, why do you want this job? Sarah.
I didn't grow up in a political family. My parents were active in their union, but I didn't grow up wanting to be in this position of public service. I got into public service at the local level because I wanted to see sidewalks in my community. But what that's led me to believe and learn is that federal policy is broken. It's created, it's outdated. It's created with barriers, or it's designed by folks that don't even live like an average American, and it is distinctly missing the mark on how we raise our communities into a position of a better quality of life. So I'm running for Congress to improve the quality of life for Central New Yorkers, but more importantly, my life and experience has led me to meet this moment. I have already managed federal budgets, managed federal grant programs. I've created federal legislation, foreign policy legislation. I've served as a national security advisor. I'm a mom raising 2 kids in a post-Roe era. I've got the experience that we need for the job, but more importantly, I've got the know-how of how we get from the idea that all politics are local to ensure that federal legislation is created to protect our families and rise everybody here in Central New York.
Thank you, Sarah. John, why do you want this job?
Thank you. First of all, I'll talk to the job that I'm doing right now. Last year, we had 22 bills passed through Congress, signed into law. I had, in 2023, 27 pieces of legislation that passed both houses of the state legislature and were signed into law. That is the voice of the people of Central New York, the people of public education, the people with disabilities, getting enshrined into New York state law. Why do I want this job? Because I left the friendly confines of the classroom, a job that I loved, the most gratifying job in the world, because I watched my kids and those kids that I taught face a future like I had never imagined could occur. We need true leadership in Congress. We needed true leadership in the state Senate. That's why I ran and won an election. I'm proud to say that I represent a district as the only Democratic senator out of 42 of us that has more registered Republicans than Democrats. It's going to take that kind of bipartisanship and dedication to NY22 to make sure that we have our voices heard and we bring back our fair share.
At this point, I'm going to give you each a chance to ask a question directly of your opponent. So if you'd like to take a minute and think what you'd like to ask, we will start with you. But while you take a moment, once again, I want to thank the Newhouse School here at Syracuse University for partnering with us on this debate. We've got a whole team full of students and staff here that have really made this happen, and it's been great to work with them, and it's great to have them here with us tonight. So John, I'll start with you. I'll give you a chance to ask a question of Sarah, and then Sarah, you'll get a chance to answer, and then ask a question of John.
When we started this race, I made a pledge along with Sarah and 2 other candidates to remain unified in our attempt to make sure that we flip this seat that we've lost for 10 years, and I have held true to that pledge. So my question to Sarah is, as you have committed to Democratic unity, what we've seen in the media recently and coming out of your campaign is very harsh, misleading, and certainly exaggerations or blatant lies. Why are you doing that when we need to hold this seat and it makes both of us look worse?
I'd actually push back a little and say that I presented the facts. They have been fact-checked twice now, and yes, you did receive financial campaign donations from National Grid and other energy providers. I would actually like a redaction of that story and potentially an apology if we could get to that. But at the end of the day, we are here and united to beat Brandon Williams in November. Make no mistake about that. What we do, though, in terms of ensuring that our communities here in Central New York, they need to know the facts about who they are running, who they are going to elect and nominate for the Democratic nomination in November. It is imperative that they know who is funneling money into whose campaign and why. Because I'll tell you, I have questions too. So if you have questions, you should be asking Senator Mannion, why did you take the money? Why did you take those votes? And why did you say what you said?
Is that your question back to John, or was there a separate question back?
There's another question.
Okay. Well, ask your question, and then, John, I'd like to give you a chance to
Sure.
respond.
You're a teacher, and I'm not going to, being a teacher is something that is valuable for our community. I am curious, though, knowing that the federal government has very little role in education. In fact, the crux of the role for Congress in terms of education policy is through the funding mechanisms. So I would love to know what you plan to do for teachers and our schools in Congress if you cannot and do not have the authority to reduce the classroom sizes, reduce the ratio of teachers to students, or increase the teacher salary. What is your plan to do in education for your students and teachers?
We have a former president that is stating that he will dissolve the Department of Education. And the Department of Education provides funding to our most vulnerable students that have IEPs. So to make sure that all students can have a dignified education that is individualized and appropriate, I will stand up strongly with our public schools, both at the state level and at the federal level, to ensure that the protections that are provided to those students in laws like the IDEA are maintained, and that we continue to fund those systems so that our school districts can provide the robust, necessary, and individualized services for those kids.
All right. Thank you both. I'd like to move on. I have on both your podiums, you have a blank sheet of paper and a Sharpie. What I'd like to do is pretend for a minute that the political spectrum from right to left is a 1 to 10 scale. At 1, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene. At 10, we have AOC. Right to left, 1 to 10. I'd like you to write big enough, hopefully, so we can see it on the screens here, where you think you fall on that scale, and hold it up for the camera, and then I'll have you each explain why. All right, I think John's got a 7 and Sarah's got a
That'd be a 6 to a 10.
6 to a 10. All right, Sarah, I'm going to ask you to explain your range first here.
I'm a values-oriented Democrat. I don't prescribe to the labels. At the end of the day, I am here to ensure that we are uplifting the communities of Central New York. And that's through accessible, affordable health care, that's through child care, that's through good paying jobs, transportation, affordable housing. It's ensuring that we're addressing the climate crisis. So when you ask me to put myself on a number line, simply can't do it, because I'm here to represent everybody in Central New York and push through democratic policies that serve us best.
John?
I do agree with Sarah that it really comes down to the legislation, and that's why I commend her for putting a range. I represent Central New York, and this is a district that is a down-the-middle district. It is one where you've got to be in tune with all your constituents. As I stated, I'm the only Democratic senator that has more registered Republicans in the state Senate, and I represent 29 municipalities out of 33. So we need representatives that are not just good reflections of the district, but they're non-toxic, they're trusted. And we expect a lot from them. We expect more here in Central New York and the Mohawk Valley, that individuals conduct themselves that way. But I'm proud to be a part of a Democratic conference that is taking progressive ideas, turning them into law, and changing people's lives to make the state more just and more equitable.
John, we'll start with you for this, I believe, will be our final question. How does Joe Biden's presence at the top of the Democratic ticket help or hinder the Democrat running this fall in the 22nd Congressional District?
So Joe Biden is an alumnus of Syracuse University. And if you look at what has happened over the past 3.5 years, what we've seen is a real commitment and investment to this region. The I-81 project is one of the largest projects ever in this country, and certainly in this state, the largest in upstate New York. We are changing our community for the better, and a commitment to it, and there's lots of local jobs that come with that. Additionally, The president made us a priority. We are not just where Micron is coming, but we're also a place that is a tech hub. We're a drone hub. And President Biden cares about this region. He has family in this region. He's invested in it. And what he has done over these 3 years locally has really transformed this region moving forward. We're a part of a renaissance, and he is a part of that.
Thank you. Sarah.
Sure. The Biden administration has done some great stuff. I got 2 comprehensive sidewalk programs as a result of the American Rescue Plan Act. We've got 81. We've got Micron. His support for labor and for working families has been fantastic. But I'm on the campaign trail a lot, and I hear your concerns. So that's why we're trying to deploy a concept called reverse coattails. It's when you nominate a Democratic nominee that is in stark contrast to the top of the line. I am a short, feisty, energetic, overqualified woman. I excite voters. Every single race that I have been in, I have overperformed. We need that type of voter turnout in November, and that's why when you use reverse coattails, you allow the stronger candidate to carry the entire Democratic ballot. And that's what I plan to do, and it's a winning concept.
That's the first time I've heard that term. All right, so that's all the time we have for questions and answers here. Thank you both for taking the time to answer some of our questions. I'd like to give you each 90 seconds for a closing statement, and based on our coin flip, John, we will start with you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to Syracuse University for hosting this event. I've lived here my whole life. I watched the job losses of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And when I got elected to office, I was committed to making sure that we do what is best for this region so that our kids and our grandkids could live here. I did not believe or imagine that we would have the largest private investment in the history of this country, and I'm proud to say that I had a lot to do with that with other leaders in the region and at the state and at the federal level. As I said before, I loved my job. I left a classroom because I said, we can do better. We can do better. We can work together. We can be non-toxic. We can be successful. This is a great country. I'm proud of this country. And we are on a path right now that we have to change. It takes true leadership and courage. It takes a teacher to be able to do that. I'm still teaching in the state legislature, and there's a lot to be taught in the halls of Congress. I ask you for your support in helping me transform not just our region, as I pass legislation to do that, but transform our country together, to bring us back together to the American dream that our parents and our grandparents have. This is a great country, and I ask for your support.
Thank you. Sarah.
I want to extend my thanks again to syracuse.com, Newhouse, and to you, Chris, for hosting this event, and also to express my gratitude for Senator Mannion for joining us tonight. Central New York and the Mohawk Valley, the path is clear. I firmly believe that I am the strongest candidate to beat Brandon Williams in November. And let's flip that house in the same moment. Republicans know that Brandon Williams is weakest when the Democrats nominate a veteran with a fresh perspective and an unburdened tie to Albany. I'm that candidate. Today marks a rare moment for us. We as Democrats, we finally get to decide and consider a type of Democrat that we want to run for us and represent us in Congress. I'm the kind of Democrat who would never claim to align with Brandon Williams on multiple issues or call Central New Yorkers ignorant behind closed doors. I'm a mom, I'm a veteran, an environmental policy expert. I bring this unique perspective to me every day and to this race. But importantly, I'm the only candidate who continues to reject special interest money. I firmly believe this positions me to bring home a victory in November. But you know, this race is bigger than me and it's bigger than you. It's about upholding American democracy. It's about the opportunity to elect a candidate who understands the issues at the federal level, but more importantly, realizes that all politics are local. It's about ensuring that Central New York, the Mohawk Valley, thrives by providing support and services to our young families and to increasing our local economy. So let's not waste this moment, and let's choose the Democrat who will champion our democratic values regardless of the political tides. I would love your support in the primary and moving towards November. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John. That's all the time we have tonight. Once again, I'd like to thank Sarah Klee Hood and John Mannion for joining us, and to thank the Newhouse School here at Syracuse University for hosting us today. And again, I'd like to thank all the students and staff here at the university who helped make this event possible. A reminder, both candidates are running to represent the Democratic Party in the 22nd Congressional District election in November. The primary election is Tuesday, June 25th, and early voting begins this Saturday, June 15th. This primary is open only to people registered to vote as a Democrat. You can find complete coverage of this race, the issues, and the candidates on syracuse.com, and stay with syracuse.com on election night for live results and coverage. Lastly, be sure to get out and vote and make your voice heard in this election. Thank you and good night.